When dawn finally broke over Arden Keep, it revealed a kingdom painted in frost and ruin. The courtyard, once the beating heart of the wolf lords, lay littered with the fallen, friend and foe alike. Snow drifted lazily over bodies clad in chain and battered leather, muting the stink of blood and burnt timber. Rogan stood amid the wreckage, boots half buried in crimson slush. He leaned on the sword that had slain his brother, its hilt slick with melting snow and old blood. His breath came in ragged gasps that turned to mist in the bitter wind. The runes that Aelin had carved into the tower stones were now dead things, black scars in ancient granite. He should have felt triumph. He felt only the weight of his failure. Above him, ravens circled. They had come when the horns first sounded. They always did. They knew that where men dreamed of crowns, the earth would be fed. At Rogan's side, Gildred shifted uneasily. His armor was dented, his shoulder bound in a ragged strip of linen already soaked through. "My lord," the people wait. They look for a word, an order. Rogan did not answer. He traced the outline of a fallen banner beneath his boot, the white wolf of Arden, stained black with soot. Inside, the keep's stone hall still whispered with the echo of Aelin's final words, that they would be unbreakable. But Rogan knew what unbreakable meant now. Not strength, not family, a curse. A crown made of ash and iron that would grind every oath to dust. He turned to Gildred at last. "Gather the pyres, all of them, ours and theirs." Gildred stiffened. "Even Kaer?" "Especially Kaer." The old captain did not argue. He nodded once and strode away, barking hoarse orders to the few men still standing. Rogan sheathed his sword and climbed the tower steps again, one hand pressed to the wound beneath his ribs, each step scraped against raw bone and memory. When he reached the ruined chamber, the dawn light poured through shattered windows, catching the circle of cracked runes like veins of ember and old stone. He found Aelin where he'd left her, laid out within the broken circle, her hair spread like ink across cold flagstone. Her eyes were open, staring at a ceiling she would never see again. He wanted to curse her, he wanted to forgive her. He did neither. Instead, he knelt beside her, brushing ice from her brow. "You should have been queen," he whispered. "I would have followed you." But that time was ash beneath the snow now. He closed her eyes with the back of his gauntlet, rose, and looked through the tower window toward the forest's edge. Already, crows gathered in the pines. The Marindor survivors had fled into those woods, and with them, the rumor of Arden's ruin would spread like wildfire. Other houses would hear that wolves had turned on wolves. They would come with blades sharpened not by iron, but by vengeance and old debts. He turned from the window, shoulders heavy with a new burden. Below, Gildred and the remaining men were dragging bodies into heaps. Smoke rose where they piled broken shields for kindling. Rogan thought of the old stories that a lord's soul was carried by fire to join the first wolves beneath the northern star. Kaer's soul would be forced to walk beside the kin he'd betrayed, Aelin's who knew where witches went when fire took them. A shout drew his eyes to the gate. A rider approached, a lone figure on a pale, mud-splattered horse. The men at the pyres parted warily, hands on hilts, but the rider raised empty palms. Rogan descended the tower steps once more, heart pounding with the dread of fresh news. At the courtyard, the rider dismounted and fell to one knee. A boy, barely 16, breathless, eyes wide with exhaustion and terror. "My lord," the boy gasped, "I bring word from Northwatch Hold." Rogan said nothing, just waited, the way his father had taught him when he was young and soft-spoken and desperate to fill silences with fear. The boy swallowed hard. "Raids, my lord. The Black Banner men cross the river. They ride with 300 spears. Northwatch burns." Rogan's vision blurred, not from shock, but from the weary certainty that the wolves of Arden would never have peace. Not in his lifetime. Not with the blood of Kaer and Aelin still warm in the snow. He gripped the boy's shoulder. "You did well. Go inside. Eat. Rest." When the boy was gone, Gildred stepped to Rogan's side, watching the horizon as smoke rose from the pyres. "Another war, my lord?" Rogan breathed deep, the frozen air biting his lungs raw. "Another war." He looked down at his hands, blackened with old blood, new blood, his blood. He flexed his fingers, as if feeling for something that might still be clean. "Ready the riders," he said at last. "Send word to the old bannermen. Tell them the wolves are still here." He turned his eyes north, where dawn's pale flame bled into an iron sky. Somewhere beyond that line of frost, enemies stirred, and Arden's last son, battered but unbroken, would meet them with steel. Because winter was not the end. It was only the waiting. The road north wound like a scar through a forest that had known centuries of bloodshed. It was older than Arden Keep, older than the wolf lords who ruled it. A path carved by merchants, raiders, pilgrims, and thieves, long before Rogan's line ever dreamed of iron crowns. Rogan rode at the front, his cloak snapping behind him in the bitter wind. Gildred was at his side, still wearing the same battered armor from the siege. Behind them, 24 riders followed in grim silence, the last remnant of Arden's once proud host. Their horses were lean and restless, stamping frost-crusted hooves on the frozen path. They had ridden since dawn with no fire, no banners, shadows among shadows. When the trees parted, Rogan reined in atop a ridge that overlooked the plain below. Smoke rose on the horizon, Northwatch hold, or what was left of it. Even from miles away he could smell the ruin, scorched timber, charred flesh, iron that had tasted too much life. Gildred spat over the side of his horse. "Damn the black banner dogs, they don't even wait for the spring thaw." Rogan said nothing. He studied the smoke, counting, calculating. 300 spears, the boy had said. More likely 5. Once every petty lord and opportunist joined the feeding frenzy. Wolves feasted on corpses, men feasted on kingdoms. A rider urged his horse up the slope to join them. His name was Bran, barely a man, but clever with traps, and silent as a shadow when he chose to be. "My lord," Bran said, "we found tracks at the river crossing, heavy wagons, oxen too." "Plunder?" Gildred asked. Bran shook his head. "Slaves." Rogan felt the word like an arrow between the ribs. Slaves. Northwatch was a border hold, home to stubborn families who'd farm the frozen mud and call it soil. They'd raise thin goats and thicker sons who'd die clutching pitchforks, if it meant keeping strangers from taking their wives and daughters. "They're not far," Bran said. 2 days ahead, maybe less. They're pushing the wagons hard, but the snow slows them same as us." Gildred looked at Rogan, waiting for orders. Rogan's mind drifted back to the pyres at Arden Keep, to the smell of burning kin. Then, to Aelin's eye, as if she spoke of the unbreakable chain, the iron will that bound blood to blood until none could breathe free. What freedom could he promise now? What crown could he wear that wasn't forged from betrayal? "We catch them before they reach the old mines," Rogan said at last. "They'll hole up there if they can. Fortified shafts, stone tunnels, a siege we can't win." Gildred grunted. "It'll be bloody." "It's already bloody." Rogan nudged his horse forward down the ridge. The riders fell in behind him without a word. Wolves to the hunt, tired but hungry enough to taste vengeance in the cold wind. They rode till dusk, then deeper into the black woods. Snow muffled the sounds of hoofbeats, but not the murmurs that drifted among the trees. Talk of home, wives left behind, the children they'd sworn to protect, and now feared, might starve while their fathers chased ghosts. At a bend in the trail, Rogan called a halt. They dismounted beneath a stand of ancient pines, where the wind whispered through black branches like an old witch's breath. Gildred approached as Rogan knelt to study the tracks in the snow, deep ruts where heavy wheels had turned wet earth to frozen mud. "They're desperate," Rogan said. "No scouts, no outriders, just cattle in chains." "Slavers are always desperate," Gildred said. He looked away, then added, "We could turn back, hold the keep, let the lowlands burn themselves clean." Rogan snorted. "And when they're done burning each other, they'll come north again, for us." He rose, brushing snow from his gloves. "When men see weakness, they smell gold, or blood, or both." He met Gildred's eyes, and for a moment they were boys again, standing before Kaer's war table, pretending they were wolves and not pups begging for scraps from older, crueler jaws. "How many times did we swear to break the old ways?" Rogan asked softly. Gildred's laugh was a brittle thing in the dark. 100 times, and yet here we are." Rogan gripped his shoulder, a brief spark of warmth in a forest that knew none. "Here we are." The camp was a ghost of its former self. No roaring fires, No drunken boasts. Just men hunched in cloaks, weapons across their knees, eyes darting at shadows that might be enemy scouts, or the black wolves that hunted these woods long before men learned to swing swords. Rogan sat apart, cleaning his blade with a scrap of cloth and snow. He thought of Aelin's final spell, the runes burned into Arden stone, and wondered if any part of her lingered, whispering through the pine boughs. He hated her for her betrayal. He loved her for her strength. Maybe that was the curse, that love and hate shared the same heartbeat, drumming like a war drum in the dark. Near midnight, Bran returned from scouting ahead. He knelt before Rogan's fireless circle, breath clouding the icy air. "They're less than half a day now," Bran said. "They've made camp by the old stone bridge. No sentries worth salt. They think no one's mad enough to follow." Rogan nodded. "Then we prove them wrong." He stood, slipping his sword back into its scabbard with a hiss that cut through the hush like a promise. "Wake the men. We ride at first light." Gildred gave him a sidelong look, something between worry and respect. "You know we're outnumbered." "We're wolves, Gildred," Rogan said, his voice a growl beneath the rustling pines. "We've always been outnumbered." He turned to the gathered shapes beyond the circle, his kin, his curse, his only hope in a world that had turned its back on honor and oaths. "Tomorrow we break the chain." The wind howled through the trees like laughter or mourning, maybe both, but Rogan did not flinch. Dawn broke late and grudgingly on the day Rogan's riders came for the slavers. It found them crouched among frost-bitten bushes at the edge of the old road, breath pluming in the brittle air, eyes fixed on the faint glow of fires by the stone bridge ahead. Rogan lay belly down on the frozen slope, the damp seeping through his cloak. He could see them clearly now. A ragged column of wagons pulled in tight around a half-collapsed watchtower. Horses, oxen, men with black banners flapping like carrion birds over rotten meat. And chained to the wagons, villagers. Dozens of them, huddled under threadbare blankets, guarded by rough men with cudgels and dull spears. Gildred crawled up beside him, pushing aside a branch that threatened to snap under the frost. 100 at least, by my count, he muttered. "Could be more inside the tower." Rogan's eyes flicked to the ruins. He could see shapes moving in the broken windows. Sentries, bored and careless. These weren't hardened soldiers, not anymore. Raiders who'd grown fat on easy prey, the worst kind. "How many wagons?" Rogan asked. 6, maybe 7, heavy with plunder. And people. Rogan studied the bridge. It was old, built by kings long dead, its stones cracked and moss-choked. The river below was mostly frozen, but fast water ran beneath in places where the ice broke. One wagon at a time could pass the bridge. A choke point. A trap. Or a gift. He looked at Gildred. "We split. 20 men hit from the trees, the rest come from the bank. Push them back toward the bridge. Break their line, stampede the oxen if we can." Gildred grinned, despite the frost caked in his beard. "Like wolves driving deer to the gorge." "Exactly so." Bran slid up beside them, quiet as snowfall. He held a short bow strung with fresh gut, a quiver slung over his back. His eyes were wide, pupils huge in the half-light. "I'll take the tower." Rogan met his eyes. The boy had grown up with a snare in one hand and a knife in the other. "Take 2 men, climb the north side. Kill the watchers quiet." Bran nodded once, then melted back into the trees. Rogan turned to Gildred. "Once the fight starts, no prisoners." Gildred hesitated. "None?" Rogan's jaw clenched as he watched a slaver shove a barefoot woman toward the fire with the butt of his spear. She stumbled, fell, her chain rattling like a death bell. The man laughed. "None," Rogan repeated. When the first arrow hissed from Bran's bow, it struck so cleanly the sentry made no sound, just a soft, startled grunt as he pitched backward off the ruined tower wall, vanishing into the dark below. A heartbeat later, another man fell, then another. Then the hush of dawn shattered in a chorus of wolf howls. Rogan and Gildred rose from the brush, with steel flashing in their fists. The riders surged after them, feet pounding snow into muddy slush as they screamed the old battle cry of Arden, "For the pack!" The raiders stumbled to meet them, half awake, weapons drawn with fumbling hands. A slaver lunged at Rogan with an axe. Rogan slipped the swing, drove his sword point first under the man's ribs. felt the crunch of iron through bone. He ripped the blade free and kept moving. The first wagon buckled sideways as a horse broke its harness, panicked by the clash and roar. A wheel cracked on a hidden stone. The driver shrieked. A bolt from Bran's bow silenced him mid-breath. Gildred fought like the bear he was named for. Heavy steps, brutal swings. A raider tried to slip behind him. Gildred backhanded him with a mailed fist so hard that teeth scattered into the mud like white seeds. Rogan pressed forward, deeper into the fray. His men fanned out, cutting down any who ran. One band of slavers formed a knot around the villagers. Knives pressed to throats, shields held up like crude bargaining chips. Rogan lowered his sword just enough to speak. "Let them go," he growled across the frozen ground. "You'll die either way, but you might see the sun rise first." The leader spat, a broken-nosed brute with greasy hair. "You think you're still lord here, wolf? You're nothing. Arden's bones belong to the crows now." Rogan tilted his head. The man never saw Bran slip through the chaos behind him. An arrow took him in the back of the neck, and the bargaining chip fell with him, twitching in the dirt, still reaching for a word that wouldn't come. The other slavers panicked. Some turned blades on the captives to earn a final cruelty, but Rogan and his men were already there. Iron against iron, screams and steel. When the killing stopped, the chains lay on the blood-soaked snow like shed skins. When it was done, the survivors, if they could be called that, huddled together by the shattered wagons. Old men, thin women, children who hadn't yet learned what their freedom would cost them next. Rogan stood among them, helmet off, face spattered with someone else's life. He looked each one in the eye. They flinched at first, then saw what he carried, the truth of wolves. Brutal mercy. An unbreakable promise that blood could still buy something worth keeping. Gildred stepped up, wiping gore from his axe with a scrap of burlap. "We can't take them all north, Rogan. Not enough food, not enough horses." Rogan nodded. He knew it already. Every mouth they saved was a mouth that might starve them come the thaw. He turned to the villagers. "Those with kin at Northwatch. You'll bury your dead there. Hold what land you can. My riders will stay until the next threat comes. We have no walls left to hide behind. So we stand together, or we die alone." A woman stepped forward, the one he'd seen shoved by the fire. Her cheek was bruised, her lips split, but her spine was straight as a blade. She dropped to one knee before him. "My lord," she said, "the wolves will stand." Behind her, the others echoed her words, not with cheer, but with the grim hush of people who knew winter always comes. That night they burned the wagons on the stone bridge. The fire lit the river like a ribbon of molten gold. Sparks rose into the frozen sky, prayers or curses, no one could say. Rogan watched it all, Gildred at his side, Bran perched on a broken wall like a crow. "You think this changes anything?" Gildred asked, voice hoarse. Rogan's hand closed around the wolf medallion at his throat, old silver, battered by war. "It changes today," he said. "And in Arden, sometimes a single day was enough." Snow fell thick that night, heavy enough to bury the old blood on the road. The flames of the burning wagons still glowed faintly on the horizon when Rogan's riders turned south, not toward safety, but toward the shadow of the Blackwood. No one spoke. The wind carried only the groan of saddles and the soft hiss of hooves through powder. Even Gildred was quiet, his usual gruff mutters swallowed by the silence of men who had seen too much killing for one day. Bran rode near the rear, bow across his lap, eyes flicking to the tree line. The Blackwood was no friend to travelers, even in daylight. At night, with the snow muffling all sound, it was worse. Rogan could feel the forest watching them, not with eyes, but with a kind of hunger. They rode until the moon was a pale coin in the west, then halted by the carcass of a burned-out farmhouse. The roof had collapsed long ago, leaving the walls like black teeth biting at the sky. "We camp here," Rogan said. Gildred dismounted with a grunt. "Camp? Here? You can smell the rot." "Better we stink than freeze," Rogan replied, "and the walls will break the wind." Bran slipped into the shadows without a word. Rogan knew the boy was circling the camp, laying snares and listening for trouble. He didn't need orders for that. The forest had taught him more than Rogan ever could. They lit no fire. Bread and salt pork were passed in silence. Snow gathered on cloaks and shoulders until they looked more like statues than men. Gildred chewed his meat and finally spoke. "You mean to go through the Blackwood, don't you?" Rogan didn't look up. "It's the fastest road south." "It's not a road," Gildred said flatly. "It's a grave. Every hunter from here to the coast has a story of men going in and not coming out. Stories keep cowards away. I've been through before." That was before the dead started riding. Rogan's jaw tightened. He had heard the rumors. Black-armored riders on rotting horses, their eyes pale fire. Whole villages found frozen in place, no sign of struggle, as if the life had been pulled from them in a single breath. "They ride the King's Old Road," Gildred said. "And the King's Road runs through the Blackwood." "That's why we're going," Rogan said. The first sign came before dawn. A crow lying in the snow, its wings spread wide, feathers rimed with frost. Bran found it when he returned from his watch, holding it by one claw. "It's still warm," he said quietly, "but there's no wound, no blood." Rogan took it, turned it over in his gloved hand. The bird's eyes were clouded white, as if it had drowned in milk. He dropped it into the snow. "We ride." The Blackwood swallowed them whole. The trees here grew so thick, their branches wove into a roof that blocked most of the sky. Snow fell in slow drifts through the gaps, settling on ancient roots as big as a man's chest. The air was colder here, not the honest cold of winter, but a deeper, older chill that clung to the lungs. They passed the remains of an old mile marker, half buried in ice. The letters were worn away, but Rogan could still make out the crown sigil of Arden's last king. It felt wrong here, like a grave marker in a place where the dead never rested. Hours passed without a sound save for the creak of leather and the slow breathing of the horses. Then the wind changed. Bran's hand went to his bow. "Do you hear it?" he whispered. Gildred frowned. "I don't hear." "That's the point," Bran said. "No birds, no." The first hoofbeat cut him off. Slow, heavy, far away, yet close enough to vibrate in the chest. Rogan raised a hand. The riders halted. The hoofbeats grew louder. Not the quick rhythm of a gallop, but a steady, deliberate walk. A horse moving without hurry, without fear. Through the tangle of trees, shapes began to form, 5 of them at first, then more. Black armor dulled by frost, spears with banners stiff in the frozen air, horses whose ribs showed through their hides, whose eyes glowed like coals buried in ash. And the riders, if they could be called men, had no faces left to speak of. Helmets covered what flesh remained, but where the visors gaped, Rogan saw nothing but pale fire. One at the front carried a long sword that dragged along the ground, leaving a shallow furrow in the snow. The riders stopped 10 paces away. No breath steamed from their mounts, no sound came from their armor. Rogan felt his men shifting uneasily behind him. He forced his voice steady. "This road belongs to Arden," he called. "Name yourselves." The lead rider tilted his head. When he spoke, it was like ice breaking on a river, slow, cracking, final. "Arden is dead." The words seemed to pull the warmth from the air. Bran flinched, lowering his bow. Gildred swore under his breath. The rider raised his sword, and the others moved as one. The fight was unlike any Rogan had known. Steel met steel, but the sound was dull, muted. Blows that should have broken bones left the riders swaying but unfallen. Horses trampled through snow and root alike without slipping, as if the earth itself feared to touch them. Rogan's blade bit into the lead rider's side, cutting deep, but no blood flowed, only a hiss of cold mist that burned his skin where it touched. Bran's arrows sank into hollow breastplates and vanished, leaving no mark. Gildred split one rider's helm with his axe, but the head inside was nothing but frost and shadow. "We can't kill them!" Bran shouted. Rogan parried another strike, teeth gritted. "Then we run." They broke through the line in a burst of hooves and curses, the riders slow to turn but relentless in pursuit. Rogan didn't look back. The sound of those hoofbeats behind them was enough. They didn't stop until the forest thinned and pale daylight spilled over the snow. The riders were gone. But the road ahead led deeper south, and somewhere beyond, the Blackwood still waited. Rogan wiped his blade clean, though it seemed pointless. "They know we're here now," he said. Gildred spat into the snow. "Aye, and they'll come again." They found the village at dusk. What had once been a ring of cottages around a frozen well was now only black skeletons of timber and the stink of burnt meat. Snow drifted through shattered windows and settled on the twisted shapes lying in the street. No dogs barked, no crows circled. Whatever had happened here had left nothing alive. Gildred dismounted first, his boots, sinking into snow, stained a faint rust red. He crouched beside one of the bodies. A woman, wrapped in what had once been a green shawl. The frost had preserved her face, but her eyes were white stones in their sockets. "She didn't burn," Gildred muttered. "She froze." Rogan scanned the rooftops, the alleyways, the tree line. "Look at the hands." The woman's fingers were curled inwards, clawed, like she had been reaching for something that wasn't there. Around her wrist, a crude charm of braided straw and copper wire dangled, the kind Rogan had seen in villages desperate for protection. Bran knelt beside a child lying face down in the snow. "Same thing," he said. "No wounds, no blood, just gone." They moved through the village slowly, weapons ready, but no sound followed them except the crunch of snow. The well in the center had frozen solid. Someone had scrawled something on the stones in black pitch. "The cold is not winter." Rogan stared at the words for a long moment. "That's a warning," he said quietly. "But for who?" Bran's head turned sharply toward the forest's edge. "Riders?" "No," Gildred said after a moment. "Listen." It was faint at first, like the sigh of wind through an empty hall. Then, stronger. A sound almost like a voice humming, deep and slow. The hairs on Rogan's arms prickled. The humming came from the largest house at the far end of the square. A door hung open, frost crawling up the frame. Inside, the air was so cold, Rogan's breath seemed to shatter in front of him. The hearth was cold ash, but in the center of the room stood a figure. It was an old man, cloaked in furs so white they seemed carved from snow. His back was to them, head bowed as if in prayer. His humming was the sound they'd heard, low, steady, and wrong somehow, as if it came from deep inside the earth. "Turn around," Rogan said. The man obeyed, slowly. His face was pale, but his eyes were not dead. They burned a faint silver, like moonlight on ice. "You came from the north," the old man said. His voice was thin, but it carried through the silence. "The dead followed you." "They were here before we arrived," Rogan replied. The man nodded once. "They always are." Gildred stepped forward. "What happened here?" "The same thing that will happen everywhere," the old man said. "The Black King wakes, and his breath steals the warmth from the world." Rogan felt the weight of those words. "Black King?" The man's lips tightened. Once he had another name. Once he wore a crown of gold and sat upon Arden's throne. But death took him, and still he would not yield it. Now he rides with his 1,000, and every soul they touch becomes another shadow in his host. Bran's voice was sharp. "You've seen him?" "I have knelt before him," the old man said simply, "and I swore an oath." Rogan's hand tightened on his sword. "What kind of oath?" The old man reached into his cloak and drew out a small iron key, no bigger than Rogan's thumb. It was blackened with age, the teeth worn almost smooth. "To guard this," he said, "for as long as I draw breath." Gildred frowned. "It's just a key." The man's silver eyes flicked to him. "It opens the door beneath the king's road, the door to the vault where his heart still beats." A coldness that had nothing to do with the weather crept into Rogan's bones. "Why give it to us?" "Because my oath ends tonight," the old man said, "and yours begins." Before anyone could speak, the sound of hoofbeats rolled through the air. Slow, heavy, unhurried. The old man pressed the key into Rogan's hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "Ride south until you see the stone bridge. Beneath it the vault waits. Do not let them take it. If the Black King's heart is freed, there will be no dawn for this land." Rogan opened his mouth, but the humming sound rose again. Not from the man, but from outside, from the riders. The old man smiled faintly. "My oath ends tonight," he repeated. "Go." They didn't argue, they ran for the horses, snow spraying under their boots. Behind them, the door to the house swung shut without a touch. The riders were already entering the square, their armor black as a starless sky. The one in front held a spear with a banner of torn crimson. The sight of them made the air taste of iron. The old man stepped into the street to meet them. Rogan saw his lips moving in some prayer or curse, and then the world lit white. For a moment, everything was silence and brilliance, as if the snow itself had caught fire. When Rogan's vision cleared, the house was gone. The riders stood where they had been, unmoving. But the old man was no more than ash drifting on the wind. They rode hard into the night, the iron key heavy in Rogan's pocket. No one spoke, but all of them felt it. The riders would not stop now. Somewhere ahead lay the stone bridge, and beneath it the vault with the heart of a dead king.